took human anatomy and that changed my mind vision. And so that was my motivation to pursue that PhD. When I'm working with my students, how can they best prepare to work with diverse populations, right? And we still text each other to check in. It's more so about discipline than it is about motivation.
Hey, great day, everybody. Welcome to another great episode of highlighting mental health providers all over the country as it relates to diversifying mental health and how different mental health providers are state to state. And so we have an epic guest. I'm actually surprised that he has never been on the podcast, but he is part of our community. He's been to our live events, and he has a wealth of knowledge, especially for the clinicians who are just starting their journey into career. I'm going to say early career at that. And so I am going to bring him on. And then per usual, we're going to get this conversation started. And he's going to tell you a little and a lot about his journey in entrepreneurship and also what he's doing right now. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Warren.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's get this conversation started. As you know, we have a good amount of psychology students who tap in on YouTube and on TikTok. And I know that is part of your special sauce as well, is like pre-career, early career. And then we also have people amongst our peers, which are already in the mental health field. So for those who are in the beginning, tell our audience a little bit about what made you choose mental health and what was that beginning journey like when you first start going to college for psychology?
Yes, for sure. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Warren Wright, licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. I'm also a national certified counselor in private practice, as well as I serve as a counselor, educator, and professor. And I've done that for some years now. When it comes to my journey into the mental health field, believe it or not, I started off as a pre-nursing major in undergrad. So I was a pre-nursing major. I was going to be a registered nurse in the Army, following my dad's footsteps because he was in the Army. And I actually took human anatomy and that changed my mind. Folks who ever have taken human anatomy and physiology, that is a tough course. And I was like, I'm really not feeling it. And I was like, I need to pivot in my academic career at that time as an undergrad student. And so I was speaking to one of my professors because I was also considering doing psychology as like a double major at the time. And she said, why don't you just switch your concentrations, like do psychology as a major and then nursing, or what it was called then, health education and promotion as a minor. And so that's what I did. And she shared with me that I'd be a great counselor. Didn't really know about counseling. I thought it was another term for psychologists. And I was like, well, I don't want to go back to school for all those years at the time. And she was like, no, you can go back and get your master's. It's a terminal degree. And she knew that I wanted to help people in a different way, especially around wellness and mental health. And so she was like, that's what counselors focus on, wellness perspective and helping people, families, groups, couples, etc. Another reason for getting into the mental health field, my dad did 23 years in the U.S. Army. He retired, and he was diagnosed with PTSD. And so I got to see him be successful as well as, sometimes where he did struggle with his diagnosis. And I always said I want to support other people who have experienced trauma, especially with him being, during time in the war. And so that was something that was a pivotal moment for me to say, hey, what can I do? How can I pivot in my academic career to pursue the counseling profession? And so that's what I did.
Nice. Yeah. That's awesome. I always learn something new. Like when you all are on the podcast, I mean, we hear stuff amongst each other, like in bits and pieces. And I used to do this with like the couples. I'm like, when y'all meet each other, it's like y'all learn about each other out of order. Yeah. And unfortunately, the reason why sometimes, people don't, at least in a relationship, bloom is because they're not shown someone else's life in chronological order the way that we may learn it during the intake. Yep. Or better yet, like when you go watch a movie. When you watch a movie, there's a beginning, a middle, and the end, and things make so much sense. But every time I do one of these interviews, I'm like, so many things make so much sense. And so we'll definitely come back to that. And I love the pull from even having a family member be in the military, see mental health very much in our face, especially being people of color,
Yep.
and still wanting to go out there and help and pay it forward. So
Yep.
that's awesome. And I also heard something key too, just speaking to the students, is when you get in front of the right mentor, AKA professor,
Yep.
that's key, because that's what we're going to talk about in a moment when we talk about even what you're doing right now.
Mhm.
And so I know that you did different levels of school, and this isn't something that we've really talked about on this podcast in a while.
Yep.
What are all the degree steps that you took to get to where you are now?
Yeah, so my Bachelor of Science is in psychology from undergrad. That was a 4-year degree. And then I pursued my Master of Education in Clinical Mental Health Counseling to become a licensed professional counselor. And then I took a break, about a 2-year break, before I went to apply for my doc program. And so I also have a PhD in counselor education and supervision.
Okay. Yeah, I like to break that down because we have so many acronyms
Yeah.
literally on these podcasts. And I mean, we're still learning them. And I'm in California, so they change state by state, and then master's to doctoral level, they, change over time. Now, this is a question that I get in my inbox more for mentorship question is, why did you choose to get the doctorate degree? Because I think some people are stuck there and they're not sure why they should get it. So why did you get it?
Yeah, so for me, even though I pursued nursing in undergrad and pivoted into the mental health field, I always loved education. I always loved teaching. And so with speaking to my mentors and my professors back in the day, they shared with me, hey, like if you love teaching and you want to consider doing research and wanted to be in academia, you're going to need the PhD in counseling and supervision. And so that was my motivation to pursue that PhD, so that way I can become a counselor educator.
Okay, nice. I'm trying to make this as much educational as possible before we get into this business. So I like to just restate some things, because literally on that video that I had showed you at one point on my page, where it's like how to become a clinical psychologist.
Yep.
These are the questions that people are asking over and over and over again. So I'm like, well, let's just get their answers on up in here.
Yeah.
And what I usually tell them is like reverse engineer it. So like, luckily you had someone, and they need to find someone who is doing what you want to do.
Yep.
And then you, of course, look it up online, because we may be outdated if we've been in the field for a long time.
Right.
But you want to reverse engineer it and think about, where do you want to work? Because there's nothing wrong with working a 9-to-5, having a W-2, even part-time.
Yep.
And those requirements will tell you exactly what you need outside of what you desire.
Yep.
And so that's great, because that's how some people also will waste time, because they don't know how to talk to somebody. So I'm glad that you have that.
Yep.
So, all right. So we got the master's, we got the doctorate. Now let's shift over to entrepreneurship. And so I know that you've done private practice. We'll get into some of the scalable things that you're doing now. What was your first introduction to entrepreneurship in the mental health field?
So my first introduction, I would say, to entrepreneurship would have to be, I worked with my faculty mentor in my master's program. And I did a conference proposal, right? That was part of kind of like I forgot what it was called. It's kind of like part of our development plan of like really understanding what we do outside of just traditional one-on-one counseling. And we do like professional conferences and stuff like that. And so I submitted a proposal, did that. And then I'll never forget, there were 2 women that came up to me after the presentation. It was like, you're our next paid speaker for a training that we're doing with our organization. And so I just remember feeling stuck, like, I'm just a student, right? I'm just a graduate student. But it was from there where my mentor, again, my advisor and professor, she stood in and was like, hey, I'm his professor, and he would love to do it. She was like, he would love to do it. And, I'm going to support you in how to create your contract, how to do your invoice. And so I would say that was my first introduction of, I can get money outside of just doing counseling.
Yeah.
So I would say that was my first introduction. And then I served as a staff counselor for a college counseling center after my master's program. And so from there, again, doing small, speaking engagements here and there, just doing things outside of my traditional 9-to-5, to where I was kind of like, I can really do this more full time. What does this look like for me? And so, of course, depending on the state that you're in, you have to get licensed first to practice independently. And so I had to work towards getting, so many hours for licensure. And so once I did that, I moved into working in a private practice. I had a solo private practice, still have my private practice, have a small caseload. And so from there, that's when I started, just exposing myself more to what does entrepreneurship look like. And so for me, it was helpful because it was more of a flexible schedule, because I also was back in the classroom, right, as a doc student. And so for me, I can see clients during the day and I can go to class at night and then, just do what I can to accomplish that PhD. So.
Yeah. And I'm also seeing just like we talk a lot in our community about skill set.
Yep.
And, oftentimes what is not talked about is, we go to school, we learn how to do therapy, especially if you have the ability to go to campus, because I know college looks different right now. But, I used to remember doing role plays in class and learning what therapy actually looks like, and then it looking drastically different still, even in real life.
Yep.
But I say all that because you said something very interesting around like having the right people that are watching your journey and give you an opportunity. And no matter how far-fetched it was, I'm going to look at like what you're doing now in terms of speaking and training and even being a professor and even doing therapy or being on platforms and stages, is that the skill set is speaking and speaking outside of doing therapy, because those are two different things. And so I want people to hear that no matter how far-fetched an opportunity may look compared to where you think you're going to end up, it's still building a skill set that maybe you're not aware of it, but you are building your skill set on your resume to be, offered something later.
Yep.
And so speaking, training. And so let's talk about that. And then we'll get into private practice and what you're doing now.
Okay.
What type of speaking or training are you doing, or have you been doing over the last few years?
Yeah. So for the last few years, I would say the areas that I've focused on when it comes to being like a guest panelist or facilitating some type of mental health workshop or training has been one around my dissertation topic, which was racism, racial trauma, and mental health. And so really talking about how Black professional counselors were addressing racial trauma with their clientele that was very diverse ethically and racially. I also focus on wellness and mental health just as a broad topic, whether that be, talking about how can mental health professionals, leaders and administrators work on reducing burnout, right, and compassion fatigue in their jobs, focusing on how do we deal with, or how does the organization deal with conflict, and coming up with different conflict resolution strategies and skills. Also focusing on how to diversify and increase belonging and inclusion in a organization or a company. Those are some of the different areas that I have been invited to come in as a facilitator, a trainer. I've sat on other different panels, whether it be like career development or professionalism for mental health providers. So going to different HBCUs around where I was living at the time. I live in Texas, and so attended some of like their career fairs, their career panels, and serving as like a guest speaker on those panels to talk about mental health. What can they do with a psych degree right after they graduate with their 4 years, their 4-year degree. I also focus on Black men and mental health too. So most of my clients are Black men, whether they are single or partnered. And so I also increased my services to include couples counseling. And so again, just working on how do we support the mental health and well-being of Black men, focusing on identity development pieces, trauma, anxiety, depression, etc.
Yeah. When you go to the speaking engagements, because what we've been talking about recently is the difference between B2B and B2C, especially when we offer expansion of clinical services and workshops. And for those of you who are listening or watching, B2B is your business to someone else's business, even though that business may pay you to talk to their clientele or their staff. And then B2C is you going out and hosting your own workshops. Are the workshops that you've done, have you been brought into a business and then they expose you, or have you hosted your own stuff?
It's been a combination of both. So when I go to other businesses or other companies, that's through an EAP service, right? So we can get contracted to do like individual counseling through EAP. I got contracted to do what are they called? Wellness seminars for companies and organizations. So whether it be in person or virtually, to do that for them. And then other people have invited me to come on their platforms to talk about my research or the work that I do with my clients. And so I kind of have a mixture of both.
Yeah. And I'm going to merge what you just said about EAP, even with the conversation around private practice. How beneficial have you seen being on an EAP panel for your private practice? Because some clinicians only see it as, oh, it's just another insurance panel. And I'm like, there's two sides of insurance panels. There's mental health services, and then there's EAP. And then even within EAP, you have workshops, you have crisis. It's different variations.
Yeah. So this one, I forgot. I think it came from networking event. I went to a networking event, and at the time I really didn't understand like the difference, like you just said about EAP. And I heard about, you can get contracted to EAP services for like one-on-one counseling, like providing mental health service. But then someone emailed me and said, hey, we have wellness seminars and we're looking for trained clinicians that are licensed in your area to facilitate these trainings. The presentations were already created. I really just had to bring in my expertise and personalize it, right, to share with their audience. And so I love teaching. I'm a counselor educator. I'm a professor. And so again, the skills were very transferable. I brought in what I have done with clients in practice and clinical practice. And I also talk about it from a counselor educator supervisor position of like, when I'm working with my students, how can they best prepare to work with diverse populations, right? And so I bring all of that expertise and experience into those trainings, and that really just enhanced the experience for the attendees.
Yeah, it's different ways to network is what I'm hearing. And I know that you had came to one of our live events, but again, just like highlighting the importance of connecting outside of the office. I'm gonna keep stressing that because yes, even though this mental health awareness, thing that we do every year is highlighting mental health providers, we also want to talk to the mental health providers about how to get out of your own way.
Right.
And to me, part of our self-care is like getting outside the box,
Right.
And it's very much overlooked, unfortunately, for the last now going on, well, it's past now 5 years, since the great thing happened in 2020.
Yeah.
And, a lot of therapists are really just stuck in the box of, I call the therapist cave.
Yeah.
And so we don't have a conference this year. I just want to put that out there for anybody who's going to say something. But like, what was your experience of coming in person? Because the event you came to was in Vegas, and it was about 45 to 50 therapists there. So what was your experience with the event itself? And then also being able to, how we arrange y'all sit at a table with people who were in the same arena that you were moving toward at that time?
Yeah. So for me, I would say that was probably the best experience I've had as an entrepreneur, right? Because there's a difference between like, think about, I can be a business owner and then actually being in the process. It's a mindset shift, right? And so I remember like following you through social media, and when you talk about like, you have to shift your mindset and leave that 9-to-5 work mentality, right? It doesn't transfer to being a business owner. And so being in the room changes how I view my business, how I view my services, and the different things that I could do. And then also being exposed to the other guest speakers that were doing a lot of different, innovative things in their business. It helped me to make sense of kind of like the spiritual downloads that I received, right? About just having different ideas and like, okay, what am I doing with this? It doesn't fit in the couples counseling, the group counseling, or the individual counseling, arena or schema. What is this idea? And so being with my table, we were separated by tables. I was with the speakers tables, right? The speakers table, and we still text each other to check in. Yeah, from time to time, it's like, what speaking engagements do y'all got? And so that helped with that accountability piece, right? To say, other people are in this process with me. I'm not by myself. But I would say that being in the room, it changes. One is high vibe energy, right? And so you still feel motivated to just continue to do this work. Because sometimes being a business owner and entrepreneur, it can be draining at times, right? And you need to know how to recharge. And so being in that room and being in that space helped me to recharge and believe in the ideas that I had.
Yeah, I love that. And also, thank you for saying all those things. And it's one thing that I just want to recap on is when you go to a business event, especially as a mental health provider and an entrepreneur, is that we're used to going to CE events. And what we're making very clear is, yeah, they got CEs. I sneak that in as much as I can.
Yeah.
But I want all the even CEs to be something that will grow their business and their mindset, not just their clinical skills.
Right.
And that's something that any therapist, especially those of you who are licensed that are watching or listening to this, I really want you to take seriously. By the time you get this, you still have a little bit more than half of the year left, at least in 2025. Go outside, go to one event a year. If it's a financial hardship, go to something locally. There are plenty of things that are happening. Now, I will say way more stuff is happening on the East Coast, and I'm a little bitter about that being in California. I'm gonna be real. Always got to fly 5 hours to go to a mental health event. But nevertheless, get in those rooms because you're going to grow and you're going to grow connections. I didn't know that y'all were still talking to each other. So that's always cool. Now I'm trying to picture who was at your table. And so, all right. So now let's talk about what you're doing now. So what streams of income do you have that are active as being in the mental health field? And then what programs are you in the process of launching or that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so right now, like I was sharing with you, my main focus now is teaching. I love teaching, and so that's something that I'm focusing on and doing now. The business side, though, I still have an active caseload of clients that I see. Right now, I'm averaging around 3 or 4 people a week. Of just individual counseling services. I also have some scheduled wellness trainings and seminars that are coming up in the next 2 months, where again, like I shared with you before, I'm sharing my expertise, whether it be through video, webcast, webinar format, or in person, going to the actual site to facilitate those trainings. And then me dialing back in my individual counseling services, I'm pivoting to create more coaching and mentor services for counselors in training in my business. So one being a mentor community that I'm building now and hope to launch and will be launching, late summer, is Counselor Preparation Academy, where I mentor and support counselors in training. So whether they are in a master's program, doc program, pre-license, or even considering counseling in the future as a career, I'm creating a space, a virtual space and hub, so that way I can mentor them and give back to them in that way. And then from there, I also have some other support services through direct referrals, because I have colleagues everywhere across the U.S. that are potentially working with doc students, and a lot of them are kind of finding hiccups with the dissertation process. And so I created what I'm calling office hours with Dr. Warren, where we do that one-on-one coaching to where I can support them through that process of going from, I don't know what I'm going to do with my dissertation, to actually having it together for a proposal and or defense. And so those are the different things that I'm pivoting to in my business now.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, because this dissertation thing is coming up a lot. And I know it's 2 of you in our community that help people through that process, or at least link them to proper resources. But being a professor, what do you think is the issue as to why students may not be able to complete the dissertation? Like, is it the setup of the structure of the classes or mindset of the clinicians? Like, what do you think it is?
So from talking with colleagues who are teaching doc students and then also reflecting on my personal experience in the doc program, I think there's a combination of both. Again, because I had mentors going into my doc experience, they shared with me, get through the process and do it in a smart way, not a hard way, right? Go to your classes, do what you need to do, right? Get outside of the classroom, connect and network with folks. But they also were preparing me semester to semester on how to build my dissertation over time. Because a lot of times graduate students don't really realize that it's more so about discipline than it is about motivation. And so you have to have a schedule, you have to have a mindset too, to get things done, but you also have to ask questions. And if you feel like your professors aren't giving you the answers that you're looking for, that you need, sometimes you got to go outside of your program and get those mentors that's really going to pour into you. I think also some people get through their process and their program without really investing in the process and building those relationships with their professors, because these are going to be the folks that's going to approve of you graduating, right? So if you don't have connections and relationships with them throughout your process, You take your last class, now they're going to say, okay, it's time for you to do your dissertation. It's just like, but I don't know any of my professors. What have you been doing over the past 3 or 4
Yeah.
years? Right?
Yeah.
To build those relationships with them. And so I talk a lot about accountability because I value accountability. And so with graduate students, I share that with them. You have to be accountable to your process. This is your process.
Right.
No one is just going to give this to you, right? And what have you been doing to lead up to that, right? Now, there are some situations where people will have a committee or they will have a chair. That chair leads the department, or, they get into some type of interpersonal conflict with another committee member. And so that impacts that student's, process. So we talk about that, right? But then again, even in that, it's like, okay, what have you learned from this process? How do you pivot? Because you still got to be disciplined to get it done. You can't, you came this far. We're not just going to give up now. And so I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah. And I like the latter part of what you said too, because it's preparing them to me for, even before entrepreneurship, a job. Like the one thing I learned in my working for the county, and it was so unorganized when I first started because the program that we were placed in was new, not the actual internship program. So because we had different clientele, and then our supervisor was under the program head of that program, which can get very political and complicated. The one thing that the postdocs now had told us when we first started is, if you can learn the word flexibility and you can be flexible throughout this whole year, you can work anywhere. I was like, you're right. You're absolutely like correct. But I'm glad that you talked about the different variations of it being, accountability on the school side with structure, accountability with the chair and the reader, and then most importantly, accountability of the student themselves I'm going to insert to create the structure if you're lacking the structure, unless you want to pick another chair. Because that's one thing that our chair had structure, but she had her hand in a lot of pots. And so she was a serial entrepreneur, which is where me and Dr. Roche get it from. Like, come on, because we were the only 2 little black babies, in the school. And so she was our chair. And then we have the stats professor as our reader. They were also the only 2 black professors in the whole school. And it was about 4 of us in our whole cohort in terms of us, right? And so what I did to finish, because I knew I was moving back down to LA, just for our students to be more accountable, if you're listening or watching, is I knew that it would be best for me to finish as much of my lit review as possible, actually the whole thing, if I can, before I moved from the Bay Area to Southern California. And some people may not think that's a big deal, but that's a 6-hour drive. Like, we're not talking. And so I called up that professor and I said, every week I'm going to send you something. And can you send me something back in 3 days? She said, that's all I've been waiting on. I just been waiting for you to be accountable and give me a schedule because I need you to be done. And that's why I was done fast. And so just some tips for students. So I know that you said you do the mentorship now, and you had mentioned at least the different, I'm gonna say academic levels. If somebody were to reach out to you via either social media or your website, because we will link up your information below, how would they know that they qualify for your support or mentorship?
Yeah, so right now I have it set up to where they can email me and we can schedule like a 30-minute consultation, which I actually have one scheduled this Friday with a student that's considering counseling. And so that's how I've been doing it now. And then they can email me, follow me on social media as well. And then again, still building things in the back office per se, right? So that way it can be more of a streamlined process for them to kind of know whether or not they qualify for those different offerings.
And what's the minimum degree that they need to have in order to even make sure that they're a good candidate on the application?
Yeah, so if you're focusing on Counsel Preparation Academy, it could be someone that's in their undergraduate studies, right? So pursuing a 4-year degree and considering going back for their grad program, someone who's in their graduate program now, right, pursuing a master's as well as in their doc program too. That would be the requirements.
Okay. And so you had said email. So if we link up your information below, where would people go and find you if they just want to check you out? Where do you want to send them?
Yeah, so either Instagram or my website. So on Instagram, it is I am Dr. Warren. That's IAMDR I'm Dr. Warren. And then my website is www.drwarrenwright.com. And so the doctor is Dr. Warren, Warren. Last name is Wright, Wright. So www.drwarrenwright.com. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll make sure to link all that below because, well, you already know, you and Dr. Rochelle. Anytime someone asks me about like anything below finishing, right? Like licensure, I'm like, over there. I'm always looking forward, just for also other clinicians, if you do things related to students, our students are in need. And remember, y'all, that students may not have had the opportunities that we had, honestly, of being able to go to campus online. And I just feel like that is a big missing block of like their experience with also learning high-level clinical services, because there's only so much you can do with watching somebody from this way up,
right?
And so if you could talk to the first level entrepreneurship, Dr. Warren, what are some tips or words of motivation that you would share with him to keep his head held high, to keep going, get the doctorate degree, and do all these other things later?
Something that I reflect on often is when I get this question is to remind, if I was to talk to my younger self, it would be to keep going, to write down all the ideas that you have, because they didn't make sense then, but they make sense now. And the ideas that I have now is going to make sense in the next 5 or 10 years. So they're supposed to make sense when they're supposed to make sense, right? But write it down, all your ideas.
Nice. I love that. And I'm like, that's cool to even share with the students, because they may say, I got all these ideas, but I know I need to focus on pitching myself, or going to a convention or something. So that's awesome. So I want to thank you for showing up, because again, like just showing how diversified mental health providers are in the field, and also giving people the permission to, if I can just recap, being a professor, doing speaking, EAP panels, mentoring students, having a private practice, building out digital products. Like, yes, they all came at one time, because I guarantee you somebody just gonna hear the recap and they're gonna be like, all right, I want to do all of that. And we are like, okay, go back and listen to the journey, because one step led to the next step, and it was organic because you did what you were supposed to do. And so I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. We definitely are going to do at some point, where are they now? I always like to do that for people who come on the podcast, just to see, so you can do a reflection on where you were this time and where you are at that point. So really, really excited about it. Everyone, thank you so much for tapping into another epic episode, highlighting mental health providers all over the country. Go and make sure that you tap into his Instagram, send him a DM, go over to his website if you are a student and you're interested in his mentorship, his programs, and learn more about him. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or to the podcast, depending on how you're listening or watching this. And I will talk to y'all in the next episode. Bye.